Hey folks, it's Denise Howell here, and we've got This Week in Law coming up next with Parker Higgins from EFF, Karl Susman from My Tech Boss, and Evan Brown from Internet Cases. We're going to talk about Google privacy, Twitter transparency, infringement without copying, being mad about ACTA, visible self-driving cars, and all kinds of sci-fi goodness. We'll see you next on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 147, recorded February 3rd, 2012. 1812 Sleeper Cells. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hi, folks. This is This Week in Law, where we do our best to highlight the biggest stories that relate to technology and law, give you our take on it and the take of some fabulous experts in the field. We've got a great panel for you today. Parker Higgins from EFF is joining us. Hello, Parker.
Hi, Denise.
I almost said Trevor Tim because Parker very kindly is joining us. Trevor's been on the show before and was going to join us this week, but he got called out on very important EFF business. So Parker very kindly jumped in, and we're thrilled to have him. Thank you, Parker, so much for making room for TWiL today in your schedule.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to a great show.
Me too. Also joining us today is Karl Susman, a.k.a. My Tech Boss. Hi, Karl. Great to have you back.
Hi, how are you? Thanks. Great to be here again.
Wonderful to see you, too. We tried to have you on live from CES, but the bandwidth gods weren't shining on us that day, so we're happy to have amended that and gotten you on the show.
Right. It's too bad, but I guess when you get the entire world nerds together that you're bound to have issues with bandwidth. That's always something fun to keep track of there.
Exactly. You were looking out for some legal issues that you could spot for us at CES. So hopefully today you can tell us anything that's still lingering in your memory from the show last month. And also joining us once again is Evan Brown from Chicago and Hinshaw and Culbertson and his blog, Internet Cases. Hi, Evan.
Hey, Denise. How's it going?
Going great. Good to see you again.
Yes, the same here.
Okay, so it's been a huge week. The last 3 weeks have been huge weeks in various ways relating to technology and law. One thing that has been unfolding for the last couple of weeks that we haven't yet talked about on the show that I want to get to right off the bat is the changes to Google's privacy policy. What we did talk about on the show was Google Search plus Your World, and I think that coupled with the new unified privacy policy makes for some pretty interesting discussion, especially if you pay attention to the folks at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC. They're quite concerned about what's going on with Google taking and wrapping up all its disparate privacy policies that have applied to various products that they've acquired along the way or rolled out along the way. And letting people know in what I think as lawyers, or as most of us on the call, or some of us on the call are lawyers, would agree is a very nice, straightforward, plain language attempt at getting across the message of the privacy policy. There are some concerns about shifting the context of what people post in one environment and maybe expected to stay only in that environment. But it's being made very clear by Google now that things will be folded up and aggregated and linked together across all of Google's products. And it will give them an opportunity to have a very complete profile of you, at least as far as the information that you put into Google. There has been a lot of kind of alarmist reporting on this. Different shows on the TWiT network have had some fun with some of the more alarmist headlines. But I think at bottom, there is something here for discussion at any rate, and I'm glad we have the chance to do that today. Let's start with you, Parker. I know that privacy per se is not necessarily EFF's bailiwick. You guys tend to leave that to some of the organizations that do specialize in that, such as Epic. But anonymity sure is. And certainly, anything that starts to impinge on people's ability to manage their own data and control it would be of concern to EFF, I would imagine. So why don't you give us your thoughts on this preliminarily?
Well, absolutely. And we do talk a fair bit about privacy, especially as it becomes a freedom of speech issue. Or, yes, like as you say, anonymity and these sorts of things, they are all related. You can't really talk about one without addressing the other. And in particular, search privacy, which is really one of the major changes. There was a lot of sharing among different Google platforms before this moment. But what this policy really changed was the way that search privacy and YouTube data got intermingled. And that's really an alarming trend. And the other thing that, as you mentioned, the way that they laid it out, the language of the policy is pretty good in terms of being clear to understand, and the way that they provided notification was good. But it was a little too difficult for people to really understand what the differences were between this policy and the old policy. And I think that's what led to the alarmist coverage that you're describing. And it's really been that we would rather companies handle this in a way that really makes clear what their intentions are.
Do you think that Google has managed to do that, or are you left with a sense of confusion as to what exactly is going to happen here?
Well, so they did receive a letter from, I think it was 8 congressional representatives asking about the changes. And after that, they were pretty forthcoming. But it shouldn't require a letter from Congress in order to really get at what's different in the policy.
Right.
Yeah, there are.
Go ahead. I was going to say there's a wonderful interview that I was listening to actually just before we started the show today. I encourage people to go check it out. It's the Boston Public Radio station interviewed Stephen Levy, Mark Rotenberg from Epic, and Jeff Jarvis from This Week in Google and elsewhere. And they all had great takes on this and some pretty disparate takes. One thing the point that Stephen Levy made, I think, is where I fall on this. It's that, yes, there should be choice about what happens with your data. And it should be a better choice than simply saying, well, you don't have to use our products. We're going to aggregate everything about you if you do, but you don't have to use them, or you can sign out of all the ones you don't want, sign out and be an anonymous user, as anonymous as you can be using a search engine. Don't tie it to your Google account. And then you're in good shape. I would like to see some options that included, okay, you can aggregate from these particular services that you offer, and this is the way that you can aggregate. And I'm not seeing that being rolled out as an option. Evan, how do you feel about all this?
Well, I see both sides of it. Clearly, Google's products are, with the exception of certain commercial email products, they're all free. And there is a certain overreaction among a certain set of people who think that this is, a terrible thing because, oh my gosh, Google is, certainly being evil. It's quick to jump to that conclusion. So while I certainly see Google's position in all of this, that it's doing something that's reasonable by integrating all of these services and making it simpler under one privacy policy. And along those lines, I mean, Google's motives here are, not purely just to provide products for people to use for the sake of the public good and for utility. Google is a publicly traded company. It's looking to make money. But even more specifically, if you remember back in August, Eric Schmidt was quoted as saying Google Plus. He was talking just about Google Plus, but as we can see that these notions extend all across the different suites of Google, the suite of Google products. Google Plus is not a social network; it's an identity service. So Google's clearly going in a direction here where it's going to provide a unified experience where, in part, a person's participation using Google products will be really the participation in a marketplace with all of this. So we've got to understand where Google's coming from. We've got to realize that these services are free, and so yes, you certainly can opt out by not using the service, or to make your privacy perhaps more enhanced, use different accounts for different types of services that aren't permitted to be linked, where you'd have to sign out and sign back in at the same time. So, setting all of that aside, assuming that we want to. I have a good friend, Denise. You know him too. I mean, he left he was working for a startup and went to work for Google when Google acquired that startup. And he was talking about he didn't just want to drink the Google Kool-Aid. He wanted to take the Google intravenously. He's the googliest guy on the face of the planet. Assuming that you're going to have that kind of, or even a partial mentality where you just got to have your Google stuff and you want it to be integrated and you don't mind if you sign into your Gmail account, that information there is going to help suggest what YouTube videos you may like, and help point out directions when you're using your Android device and all that stuff. If you don't mind that, I guess the concern that I would have, which is countervailing to everybody saying, "Oh, this ain't no big deal that Google's doing all this," is that there really is there is more information being gathered about users as an emergent property when all of these services are combined. The people who are trying to say this is okay, this isn't any big deal, are quick to say Google is not gathering any new information from you. It's not gathering any additional information. It's not doing anything vis-a-vis third parties. That's all true. But there really is a certain amount of new information that comes about when all of these can be linked, and there's a larger aggregate picture that can be painted of one's activity. So that's where I do draw some concern in all of this, but that's of course moderated by all of the different things that that play into all of this. The biggest one being that these Google services are free, and we as the users are the product. The services themselves are not the product.
Well, Mark Rotenberg pointed out, and the show I was listening to was called On Point. It's at WBUR in Boston. Thank you, IRC, for pointing that out. Mark Rotenberg on that show pointed out that a couple of years ago, Google got in quite a bit of trouble with the FTC over Buzz when it when it basically bolted Buzz onto email and munged those products together, and your email contacts automatically appeared as people you were sharing with in Buzz, and there were some embarrassing circumstances that flowed from that. And Google reached a settlement with the FTC over that, and there's ongoing monitoring, and it's quite a big deal. Mark Rotenberg believes that this privacy policy, if it goes into effect in March, as Google plans, will run afoul of that settlement and the agreement that they reached with the FTC. So we'll have to see how that all unfolds. I can see where, we have a kind of a similar situation where disparate products are being put together, information from disparate products are being put together in a way that users may not have expected when they began using the product. So I could see where it might raise a red flag there. I am very much on the fence about this whole issue. As I said, I want there to be a more fine-grained and yet clear-cut way to tell Google how you want your information aggregated and used. And at the same time, though, I want Google to have unified policies. One thing that this raises that Google has not yet addressed is the fact that they have a similar disparity issue with all of the various terms of use that govern their products, where the way that they use user-submitted information in Google Plus might be treated differently than the way that they use it in YouTube. And so, they have that whole issue to overcome as well. And I like them going down the road of trying to resolve these conflicts. Let's see, Karl, you haven't weighed in on this yet. As a user of Google products, how do you feel about all this?
Is that just me, or did the mainstream freeze up?
I think we're good.
Seems okay on this end. Well, anyway, I'm listening to this, and again, I'm listening to the different privacy policies and the different notices and the changes that are coming, and all I keep thinking is for the average person that's using Google for Gmail, or is using Google Plus or YouTube or any of their other properties, they're not really paying attention to our policies have changed. Click here to read, or close the box and just move on with your life. So for me, when I'm hearing that, they're making change to their privacy policies, and because I'm into it, I'll go and I'll read up on it, and I'm aware of what's happening. I think the biggest problem is that I have to assume the vast majority of people are not taking any time to read over their privacy policy. And even if they are, no offense to current company, it's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that they don't really understand anyway. Where what it really comes down to that, I think I can say in one or two sentences, they're going to take information from all of their different properties and aggregate it together, period. But the average person is not going to be able to see that. They're not going to be able to understand what that really means. And I think really the simple solution for some of this stuff, if Google was really going to be doing their do no harm philosophy or do no evil, whatever it is, they really should roll out any changes to this with the default being private. If I want to have a better integrated experience, then I should find out that it's available and read about it and enable it. I think the scary part is exactly like what happened with Buzz. And I think that was really what killed it from the get-go, was that all of a sudden, we assume that the videos we're watching on YouTube have nothing to do with, ads we might be seeing in our Gmail or different things that might be aggregated together, in Google Plus. Now all of a sudden everything is thrown together in a way that we're not expecting. It's a little bit freaky.
Right. Well, this will have to be a stay tuned. They're not planning to roll this out until March. Epic doesn't like it. The EU doesn't like it. So, they may have some big hurdles to get over before they go down this road. We have a fun video that Cash Hill put together on the topic. She seems to be in the camp of, this is a tempest in a teapot. I think we're ready to roll a bit of that. If you could, Alex.
Google is totally freaking me out.
Why? What happened?
They are taking all the information they have about me and combining it. It's official. They are evil.
Oh wow. Google already knows so much about us. Now they will have even more information.
Well, no. It's the same information, but they are combining it.
Oh, are they going to start selling it to other companies?
No.
Oh. Are they going to make some of it public like they did with Buzz?
No.
Oh. What are they doing with it?
They are combining it.
Oh. Why is that bad?
Because they are going to better target me with ads and offer me new products that use that information.
Huh? That doesn't really sound evil.
Well, a bunch of congressmen sent them an angry letter about it.
Whoa. Members of Congress don't send angry letters about privacy issues very often.
Oh, well, actually
No,
they do.
never.
The big problem is that I can't opt out.
Hasn't Google said in its privacy policy since at least 2005 that it could combine information from different Google products?
Yes, but I didn't read that. No one reads privacy policies.
You see?
But isn't that your agreement with the company about what it can do with your data?
Yes, but I want to opt out of that.
Well, can't you take your information away from Google?
I'd have to stop being a Google user.
Well, that seems like an opt-out.
But I want to be a Google user. I just don't
There's the
want to
conundrum.
be able to use or combine my information.
What does Google say to that?
They say to create different accounts for different products, or to sign out of my Google account when I use Maps, search, or watch videos on YouTube.
That seems like a solution.
Well, it's inconvenient.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you pay Google for convenience, right?
Oh, no, it's all free.
Thank you, Alex. I think that'll kind of wrap that up for us. It's not just inconvenient, though. It's, people just aren't going to do it. That's the problem.
They're not going to even know to do it. That's the problem is they don't know to do it. They don't realize that it's happening. Wow, I hadn't even thought of Google Maps. That's another one. There's just so much information that's out there. And again, they're saying that right now they're not going to be selling it, but they seem to be able to have so much leeway in combining policies from different products. That what happens if in the next privacy notice it says, by the way, we are going to have the ability somewhere in the future to sell this information somewhere else? Is that all of a sudden going to make a difference? People will read that, whereas they hadn't read the privacy policy, in the past. What happens then?
And another area where third parties enter the picture is when you talk about government subpoenas or something similar. When this data is aggregated, you can read what they say in the privacy policy, but there are other considerations. And if Google doesn't have the information, then they can't give it to the government in the case of a subpoena, and they can't sell it to third-party advertisers. But as long as they have it, it's always possible to think about them doing that in the future.
Right. Well, I think that's a good segue to another big story that we haven't yet talked about on TWiL, and that has to do with Twitter and what they're doing in response to government requests that they comply with various different laws around the globe as to what can and cannot be on Twitter. And they have taken a very interesting and Twitter-like, applause to our friend AMAC, General Counsel for Twitter, for coming up with this solution that, yes, they want to be able to do business in all of these countries, and they want the people there to be able to use Twitter for their speech and activities. And yet, in order to do that, they have to comply with local laws. Well, what they're going to do is every time that they're asked to take something off of Twitter, be it a user or a particular tweet, in response to that kind of a request from a government, they are going to keep a public record of that at Chilling Effects. And when you go to chillingeffects. Is it .com or .org? I think it's .com /Twitter. You're going to now see any of these censorship requests. In addition to, and this is a related story, Twitter recently posted the close to 4,500 DMCA takedown notices that it received, I believe, just in the last year. Or maybe that, I'm not sure if that is historical, from the inception of Twitter or just in the last year, but it is quite a few takedown notices, so there's a couple of things to talk about there. Let's start with the censorship and transparency solution. What do you think about this, Parker? Did they strike the right balance?
I think they did. And again, especially this coming right in the wake of the SOPA blackouts and all of the concern about censorship, there was a little bit of it was blown a bit out of proportion. But I think that they've done the right thing here, and it does shift the focus. When you see that something is not available in the country, it shifts the focus from Twitter policy to the government policy, the law, or in the case of DMCA, the rights holder takedown, which I think is the appropriate place for people to express their concerns. Twitter is bound by the local laws if they're going to be doing business there, and this seems like a good way to do that transparently and appropriately.
We've talked about Chilling Effects a lot on the show before, but in case you're not familiar with it, it's a wonderful project that is a joint effort between EFF and a bunch of technology law clinics at various law schools around the United States to have all kinds of information and resources available on censorship kind of issues. There's probably the biggest demand letter archive there ever aggregated in one place when people are asked to take things down for one reason or another. So it's a logical place for Twitter to partner with in making this information available. Evan, do you like the way they handled this?
I guess it's fine. It's somewhat of a it's definitely a concession to the governments who are trying to silence this kind of speech. And so at a certain fundamental level, I'm not sure why Twitter should really care, for example, what the government of Syria or the government of Iran or the government of North Korea might think or might want to block. I trust that Twitter doesn't have assets in any of those jurisdictions. So it seems to me just merely an abstract kind of statement to say that Twitter is subject to the laws of those jurisdictions. So to the extent that it's disabling the access of content to anyone, particularly in those jurisdictions, and I understand how it works, is that if the government of Syria wants to take out a user or take out a certain tweet, it would only become, it would be replaced by this gray box only in Syria, for example. So, it wouldn't be a worldwide kind of censorship. We would still see it in the United States, and we'd go protesters or whatever, it is that we're supposed to do. So, I mean, that's one side of it. I'm not sure why Twitter, sees that this is really necessary at a fundamental level, but I guess it's trying to do the right thing. And if the folks at EFF think it's okay, I guess as far as any of those kind of leanings, those concerns that one would have, that's certainly a validation of Twitter's method. So it's fine with me. I don't care. I'm just glad I live in the United States where I can pretty much tweet whatever I want.
Well, I will say.
Go ahead.
It is interesting that they mentioned examples of where this might be practiced, and the examples they give were France and Germany, where in Germany they do have boots on the ground, or will soon, and the 4,000 censorship requests so far have all been DMCA and US. So it's it's important to think about how Syria and North Korea and Iran and China want to censor the internet, but of course, this does apply at home, and there are a few people who are responding to DMCA notices as well as this.
Did anybody's eyebrows just go rocketing up to the sky when they saw the sheer volume of DMCA requests directed at Twitter, who doesn't host material?
I thought it was interesting, but I'm actually with Evan on this one, and maybe even to a further degree. I think this is a really bad precedent and a slippery slope for Twitter. I think one of the idea that now you're going to be able to get a different Twitter stream depending on where you're accessing Twitter, in what country, in what jurisdiction, is really breaking the fundamental openness and Wild West that Twitter has. I think some of the more exciting times to use Twitter is when there is an uprising in Iran, or when there is stuff going on and people start getting involved and we're in a way they wouldn't have been able to a few years ago. What happens if we fast forward a year forward, now that Twitter's coming up with the ability to say what can be viewed where? What if people at one particular religious group say, we don't want anyone that works in our church administration to see anything that says abortion. So we're going to, send this to Twitter and say, okay, if it's coming from this block of IPs, or if it's from any of these users, block the word abortion or any tweets with that. Where does it stop? I mean, if we're able to customize and block out exactly what's coming through in this, the Twitter fire hose of information, pretty soon it's worthless.
I think Twitter deserves a little more benefit of the doubt than that. They've been very good about not being overzealous about information they hand over or when they take things down. And there's no reason to assume that now that they can do it on a granular level that they'll comply with bogus notices. I think that they've demonstrated that they'll probably continue to do these takedowns in a manner that's consistent with freedom of speech here. And that remains to be seen, and you can't know until it happens. But so far, I think Twitter's been really good about this.
Yeah, let me clarify what I said a second ago when I said that Twitter doesn't host things. I think with the rollout of their photo sharing services, what was that, like 5 months ago now, that they're definitely hosting photographs. They, of course, host all the text that people put in. But they're not, a video sharing site. They're not a place where the subject of all of these DMCA requests they've received, they're not the repository of those things. The thing that I'm getting at here is that they are a repository of a lot of links. And most of the DMCA requests they've received, I didn't go through all 4,500, but I clicked through a bunch, and everyone I looked at related to a link to somewhere else where allegedly infringing material lived. Parker, do you want to give us, the EFF primer, because it's probably hard for people listening to understand why there would be any liability attached to that?
Well, sure. According to the DMCA, if you are posting links to infringing content or to to circumvention tools, that can be grounds for liability unless you take it down. And so, Twitter is even if they're not hosting the content themselves, they're subject to the same set of rules about the safe harbor. And so as long as they want to preserve that safe harbor, they have to comply with takedown notices, even if the takedown notices are for links in this case. And that's been really the same sort of way that DMCA notices have been given to, for example, torrent tracking sites, which are really search engines that don't host the content themselves. And Twitter is maybe one step further removed, but I don't think there's any real precedent that says that their links are less subject to takedown notices.
I would say they would be an information location tool, if anything, under 512D, which is the same theory that you can send a DMCA takedown notice to Google for linking to infringing content. I think that's a pretty, nobody argues with the validity of those types of things. So, if you're using Twitter to find this information, it's a tool that's helping you locate that information. So that's what I would say as to why these would be valid.
Okay, another Twitter-related story. Nobody had to. It was the United States government. It was no, Syria or Iran or anyone else doing something draconian, and Twitter didn't have to take anything down. But a couple of British citizens had a rude awakening when they were using Twitter to talk about an anticipated trip to the United States, where one of them suggested he was off to destroy America, using a colloquial term for have a good old time. And they were detained and ultimately deported. Did this surprise you, Evan?
Whoa, had to struggle to get myself off of mute there. It surprised me because what a big overreaction from the government, and I was pleased to find later that it wasn't the Department of Homeland Security just data mining Twitter to find these users who had put up this content. Somehow there was a magic checklist of words that every tweet was being referenced against to figure out who might be coming here to destroy America. Kashmir Hill, whom we've already talked about already on the show, she wrote a post on Tuesday, I think, that gave a little more context to this, saying that it was actually somebody tipped off the authorities about these people, like they'd either seen the tweet or something like that. So in any event, it's an overreaction. Clearly, this is just, silliness. It was a guy and a girl, right, traveling together, from England who, look like clearly they're just, here to have a good time and not do anything bad. There was nothing else contextual to make it look like they were legitimate terrorists or anything like that. So, it's silly. It's an overreaction, but it's not quite as scary as what I thought it was at first blush, because there was some other there were some other indications, if you will, about these folks. It wasn't just Big Brother looking at their Twitter stream.
This is what I want to know about this, and obviously no one will look at this in the story and think, well, good, they shouldn't do that. That's not okay. Forgetting any of that, maybe I'm still naive, but I never thought in a million years that the tweets are being monitored that closely, that a few tweets like that. I mean, this wasn't, a link farm that was, pushing out links to some, illegal site that finally got, checked into. This is a handful of tweets that a few people sent out. Who's watching this stuff? I mean, is that actually – apparently this is something that's going on with some regularity, that there's different areas of the government that's sitting around watching tweets, and when they see something they don't like. It reminds me, there was a This American Life had an episode on about someone that sent out a couple of tweets, and they had people, FBI, knocking on their door a few hours later. And I had the same feeling. I thought, oh, my God, they're really watching and reading all of these tweets? I mean, how is that? I don't understand. How is that possible?
Right. Well, what is the acronym or the nickname for the government product that supposedly listens in on everything and tries to detect?
It used to be called Carnivore.
Carnivore,
right?
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Tries to detect terrorist threats. Any final thoughts on this, Parker?
I think that I'd want to see more information. I think that the point that maybe this was a tip-off, or that there were the story just doesn't really add up without more information, because you can't take an isolated tweet that includes the phrase "Destroy America," and during the course of a flight determine that these people have to go home immediately.
Yeah.
So I think there are details missing. It's an alarming story if any part of it's true, really. But I think some of that remains to be seen.
Is there anybody in England that's still upset about the Revolutionary War? I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with it, does it? Is this why we have the Second Amendment, to fight off the redcoats? Maybe this is what it's all about.
They're coming.
It's a sleeper cell from
1812.
That's right.
Yes. And I have a feeling there were some cells here in the U.S. of loyalists. Maybe we should go tar and feather them.
And even more so, they're going to broadcast their plans on Twitter like that.
That's right.
I'd like to know what percentage of. I'd like to know, and maybe this is accessible somewhere. If anyone knows, please tell me. If there's a place where we can see just how many people have ever been contacted because of tweets that were in some way flagged, that were in fact actually, forget convicted, that were actually arrested. There was something actually tangible that they could go after, that they found simply because of tweets they were sending out. It seems counterintuitive to me that someone that's actually planning something or is going to do something illegal would broadcast it to the world like that.
Karl, I can tell you a percentage. The percentage is 0.
Right.
Thanks, Parker. I am vindicated.
Well, there's all kinds of cases of people using Facebook and MySpace in dumb ways, particularly MySpace. I think I've observed this phenomenon before. If you read cases coming out of the courts that deal with like prosecutions for gang members being involved with stuff, and evidently there's still a lot of use of MySpace, by gang members, and they'll do all kinds of strange things, saying that they're going to know that they're after someone, or putting that in their status update. So being as quasi-public as a closed network like MySpace or Facebook is, or those being closed space is different, of course, in kind than Twitter. But yeah, there is a phenomenon there somewhere.
Right. The sort of deprecated services become the dark net, as people, they're still there and available and just not as paid as much attention as some of the newer stuff.
I'm sorry. Did he say MySpace? What was that? Is that some social network?
It
sounds
was
familiar, vaguely.
Still hanging in there. Friendster.
Tribe.net.
I want to, in a minute here, talk about some more topical stuff, namely the presidential election and the Super Bowl coming up this weekend. But before we get to that, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law, and that is Netflix. You probably already know this, but be sure to tell your friends if you don't, that Netflix streams thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means you save time, money, and hassle. And you can access these thousands of TV episodes and movies in so many different ways via Netflix. You can watch on your computer, on your desktop, via a Mac or a PC, or lots of the devices that we all carry around with us. You can watch on a Kindle Fire. You can watch on an iPad, any number of different phones, including iPhone and Android phones. If you have a gaming console, that probably will get you into Netflix instant streaming too. Xbox, PS3, Nintendo Wii, all do it. And if you've got one of the wonderful set-top boxes that brings internet-related television, much like what you're watching now, to your living room environment, an Apple TV or a Roku, those will do it too. So once you've got yourself connected, you can watch those movies and TV shows instantly, and you can begin watching a show on one device and move to another, and it'll pick up right where you left off. However you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies as you want, as many TV shows as you want, anything on there for your one monthly fee anytime you want, and you can cancel anytime. So if you haven't already, go try it today. Netflix.com/TWiT will line you up with 30 days for free. Be sure and use that URL because it helps Netflix know that we sent you their way. And we thank them for their support of This Week in Law. All right, so
can I say one quick thing before we move on to the next topic, kind of bootstrapping on to what we were talking about with the monitoring of tweets. And, we were talking about, being all scared as the Department of Homeland Security monitoring everybody. I mean, there's something that's just come out. I think it's today. It's the first I've heard of it. That should really, allay any fears that we have that the government is effectively doing any kind of security. And that's this whole idea of the FBI and how the apparently Anonymous hacked a phone call between the FBI and UK investigators where they were actually talking about Anonymous. And I know Anonymous posted an MP3 of that conversation and some email traffic around it as well. So I know that that's kind of a story that's just come around today that is the other side of this that shows that sometimes law enforcement and its security efforts are less than effective, kind of is relevant to that whole inquiry.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to the Super Bowl. We had, I used to think of the Office of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement as the people who might detain you at the airport if you were tweeting about destroying America. But that's not all they do. They, as we know from prior stories we've covered on this show, they take down websites. And they recently took down 307 of them related to either streaming sports content without authorization or merchandise that is unauthorized, counterfeit, that kind of thing. So in advance of the Super Bowl, it looks like they were trying to make a statement, and they've done so. What do you think about this, Parker?
Well, as with all of the previous ICE seizures, it's it's hard to know how many dolphins were caught in this tuna net.
Yeah,
and it's really a scary time. We've seen with some of the earlier ICE seizures that sites have been totally innocent, or in the case of to use a really similar example. The Spanish sports site Roja Directa, which had their domain seized by ICE a year ago, has been declared legal in Spain and has been trying to no avail to get the domain back ever since. And of course, we've seen with other cases like DeJazz one, that the hip hop blog that was seized and then given back sort of unceremoniously a year later. This is a scary weekend to be losing your domain if you're a sports site. And so certainly some of these sites might have been engaged in infringement and some of them might not have. And so, without due process and the proper evaluation, this is a troubling precedent.
Yep, I agree. Evan, any thoughts on this?
No surprise. I kind of remember seeing things like this every year. I mean, isn't this kind of an annual occurrence? Kind of like the hype about the internet infrastructure on Cyber Monday, and this is kind of as regular and predictable as that, and as Al Franken and Ed Markey, the Congress people writing letters in response to privacy kerfuffles. So, yeah,
right.
Nothing new under the sun on this one.
Yeah, but Parker brings up an interesting point that actually hadn't occurred to me when I was reading this article, and I want to ask. I'll ask you guys: what is the legal recourse? I mean, if you assume that your site, if your site is pulled down, so unceremoniously, and let's just say it shouldn't be, what is your recourse, and how easy is it to actually have one of these notices sent in where you just get taken down? I would hope it's not terribly easy to have that done.
Well, I don't think it even requires a notice, does it, Parker? This is sort of an extrajudicial process that is under ICE's authority, based on the fact that many sites are hosted in or domains are managed in the U.S.
Exactly, and a lot of users find out about this or a lot of site owners find out about this when they go to their site and see I don't know if you've seen the graphic that replaces the homepage. It's a scary eagle that says this page has been seized by the ICE. And we've seen examples with a seizure that was now almost 2 years ago. They ended up seizing all of the subdomains, and it was a domain hosting platform. And so there were tens of thousands of domains on this site, all of whose users saw, in this case it's anti-piracy. In that case, it was seized for child pornography, and so without any kind of process or any kind of notification in advance, people come to the site and see that sort of the eagle and we believe this site to have been engaged in child pornography, and that's a pretty harsh punishment to be doled out before any sort of trial or proper due process.
Right. Parker, do you know, or has the EFF been involved in anybody contesting such a seizure or takedown? Do you know what the process is to contest it?
Yes, and the process is very murky. So we've been assisting with Roja Directa, that Spanish site, and it seems sort of an open and shut case. There was a declaratory judgment in Spain, and they're found legal. It's a legal site, and it's just been sort of it's been a brick wall to use something local. And similarly with the Jazz One, we weren't specifically involved with that, but we've been following it very closely, and they just the government wasn't returning their phone calls sometimes. And when they did finally get the site back, it was just, sorry, we're actually not going to do anything about this. So it's really alarming. It's really the way that works. It doesn't follow the same sort of procedures that we've got in place for other civil forfeitures.
Well, Denise or Evan, do either of you know? I mean, let's assume that a site's taken and it's eventually given back. Is there any type of recourse, civil case, anything to go back for lost business, or your fees that you would have to try and recoup for going through the process of getting your own site back that would be taken, incorrectly?
Nah, there's this thing called government immunity, where the government can take its actions in trying to enforce laws, and even if they made a mistake, you're out of luck in most instances. Evan, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The government enjoys quite a bit of immunity, and that's even enforceable. And actions by folks in other countries, it's extended by treaty, to citizens in other countries. So, yeah, not a whole lot to do there. I mean, I'd speculated a little bit about this, thinking about Mega Upload. For those folks who had those innocent users of Mega Upload who had their stuff, the access to that disabled, whether it would be some kind of Fifth Amendment takings issue. The Fifth Amendment says that the government can't take private property without just compensation, and that's private property for public use without just compensation. That's what underlies the whole idea of eminent domain and, paying people when you want to build the interstate highway through, the bad part of town or whatever. That would be problematic. I think any kind of action under the Fifth Amendment might be a little problematic in the Mega Upload case and any of these search and seizures cases, or these domain name seizure cases, because you would be doing at best something like some kind of tort action against the government, which is wrong, or which is immunized by all this. It's questionable whether or not these seizures were for a public use, which is seems to be what's contemplated under the Fifth Amendment. So I don't think there would be much of a way to go on going after the government for this.
Yeah, Evan did a great post on this actually on January 28th called "Are Non-Pirate Mega Upload Users Entitled to Compensation from the Government?" So anyone more interested in that should go check that out and wind your way through Evan's thought processes on the point. Parker, I'm curious, has anyone ever challenged ICE's authority to engage in these activities?
I don't believe there's been a formal challenge, although this is something that EFF is absolutely following closely and interested in pursuing. Because as long as you believe in due process and in innocent until proven guilty, these ICE seizures are really an affront to that. And so, yeah, it's something we're following, but there hasn't been a proper mounted defense against it.
Right. I mean, it just seems like, going back to their charter as an organization, there might be, I'd be surprised to see anything specific on the topic of domain name seizures. So I'm wondering how exactly they've arrived at the conclusion that they're authorized to do this. So maybe some constitutional scholar out there can enlighten us and fill us in. Let's talk, Evan, you had another great blog post about the presidential campaigns, which various candidates, as things heat up here, are throwing in all kinds of compelling materials to their ads, including old news footage, network news footage, that some have taken umbrage to. Can you tell us what happened there and the fair use ramifications?
Sure. There are several interesting issues that arise in this. A week and a half or so ago, the Romney campaign put together an ad. And actually, for those who are watching the live stream or watching this by video, you can see it kind of playing on the screen right now. And as you can see, it's the opening 45 seconds of the NBC Nightly News from sometime in 1997 on the day that Congress decided to impose some kind of penalty, censure. I don't know precisely what the procedure was. It had to do with Newt Gingrich's ethics when he was found to have violated some ethics rules in Congress back in 1997. And so the thing that's pretty renegade on the part of the Romney campaign on all of this is not to be confused with John McCain and being Maverick, by the way. But what Romney was doing was appropriating that NBC news footage to comprise, most of the ad that was going on here of Tom Brokaw there talking on NBC Nightly News. And so NBC is upset about this. Tom Brokaw himself is upset about this, feels like he's being used as wrongly to endorse Romney or somehow being portrayed as a supporter of Romney and that compromises his journalistic principles in some fashion. And so I thought this was a really interesting topic when it comes to the question of the copyright issues. Is this a fair use? And plenty of commentators have put out a lot of detail as to why this probably is a fair use. The question being, is this a copyright infringement? And yes, it's probably a copyright infringement, but it's okay because of the affirmative use, or affirmative defense of fair use, because there's really no market for news clips from 1997. It's clearly a commentary kind of purpose, a political kind of commentary. So for all kinds of reasons, it probably is a fair use. And so on a larger scale, what I think is the most interesting phenomenon about this is how news organizations somehow try to interject themselves into the political advertising process in this way by making these rumblings. Back in 1998, if you'll remember, in October of 1998, just a couple of weeks before the election, the McCain campaign found itself on the receipt, or the what's the opposite of a beneficiary? Kind of the
victim.
the one who was the victim of DMCA takedown notices that some big media players, I think CBS, sent some DMCA takedown notices to YouTube over some McCain ads that had used some news footage. And back, this was, we were doing the show when this was happening. I think Fred von Lohman was on the show. We were really fortunate to have him that day, and he commented on this phenomenon of what the news media's role in being responsible in managing copyright interests, and how that should, this clearly butts up against Mitt Romney's First Amendment rights and the campaign's First Amendment rights and all this stuff. And so, as of today, we're filming on February 3rd. The ad is still up on YouTube. I thought it would be, my blog post, and I know that everybody in NBC, of course, reads my blog, so they were really losing sleep over my blog post. I said, go ahead, NBC, send this takedown notice, because I think there'd be some really interesting fair use litigation, not the least of which would be this question of what is the duty of the sender of a DMCA takedown notice when there is a real legitimate question of fair use. And I'm thinking about the Lens versus Universal case, where the court held that the person sending the DMCA takedown notice really does have a duty to investigate the merits of a fair use defense. And so it's interesting, it's NBC Universal who is making the complaint, the grumblings about this, and it was Universal Music involved in that. So, I'm sure there's some sharing of intelligence when it comes, considering all these questions. So the video's still up. As a little bit of an aside here, I exchanged emails with a colleague of ours, a guy who's been on the show before. He didn't leave it as a comment, so I'm not going to say who it was, because I know he represents folks in this space. But he was saying there's probably what really is at issue here is a right of publicity claim. Does Tom Brokaw have a right of publicity objection to Mitt Romney's use of this? And it certainly seems to be what he is, what Tom Brokaw is upset about, that kind of personal interest in all of this. So I didn't really even think of that all that much when I wrote the blog post, but that's probably where perhaps the more interesting intellectualizing that there is to be done on this is in that question of the right of publicity in all of this. So tons of really interesting issues here wrapped up into one little 45-second commercial. It's fun stuff.
You forgot the most important, significant part of this story is that Tom Brokaw just does not age. Have you noticed that? Well, that's everything else aside.
Yeah. That's right, and that's interesting. In this email correspondence I was having, my correspondent, the guy I was writing with, was saying, people are likely to be confused because this is not that confusion is an element of right of publicity claim, but it goes to the question of people may not realize that this isn't a current news story because it's not clear all along that it was in 1997. Oh, there's a great screenshot on the
look at that
on the video right now showing Tom Brokaw and Jane Pauley, probably at least 25. That looks like at the bottom, was that at the Prince Charles and Lady Diana wedding? It looks like Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, it kind of looks that way.
Wow.
And he's wearing a white coat. When else would he wear a white coat?
Right. So with that, I forget what I was saying. I'm too taken by those photos, so I forget something like that.
Yes, they both look awesome for their respective ages. I think it's so funny that, having copyright issues come up in political campaign ads seems as consistent as Congresspeople writing privacy alarm letters to large Silicon Valley companies. I mean, it just happens over and over again, whether it's music or news footage. And I appreciate your comments and the reference to Fred von Lohman and the suggestion that, perhaps news organizations or news personalities may, if not have a legal obligation per se, that's any more enhanced than any other rights holder, you would think that ethically and professionally they would have some kind of pause before asking that, that fair use be treated this particular way. Parker, don't you find it interesting that politicians seem to be so oblivious to the consequences of rough treatment of fair use when a lot of them have brushes with it during their campaigns?
Absolutely. And I think that I don't think politicians are worse at it. I think this is really an issue that comes up for everybody all the time. And so, we've taken a lot of stances, especially against SOPA and PIPA, where politicians have accused us and other groups in our alliance of being too easy on copyright infringement, and this doesn't affect real people. And then we see over and over again, it does affect real people, and it affects them. And I think that it's something that once you start to think about it, you find that it really comes up all the time.
All right. Well, let's talk about something that I've wanted to get to and haven't had time because it's not sort of a major story. I just think it's interesting. That I think it was a week and a half ago or so, the Pirate Bay came out and announced that it believes the next step in copying will be made from digital form into physical form. And it will be physical objects, or as we decided to call them, physibles. So there's a whole new search node on the Pirate Bay for 3D objects that may be subject to copyright infringement. I love this kind of story because it just sort of makes me feel like, the future is now. That right. we're living in some sort of Neil Stephenson novel, or I'm reading Damon right now, and a lot of the stories we're covering this week have overtones for that book if you've read it. So
this
Evan,
was the downloading your shoes story, if I remember.
Yes, this is downloading your shoes, and also. Engadget had a related story that doesn't have to do with the finding an item that might be infringing on somebody's design, or but it was just this wonderful kind of lark that somebody did of a 3D printed record and little record player. If you're watching the video, you can see the picture of it now. So that the actual, both the medium and the player are 3D printed, and I'm sure the audio quality on that thing is not terribly wonderful. But
not even 8-bit.
Yes, it's a bit analog, but still very interesting. That the Pirate Bay has embraced the world of physical piracy. What do you think of this, Parker?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've been looking at. I think science fiction fans, like you mentioned, have been thinking about this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to be another example where we see that the content industries that really do a lot of the lobbying for copyright law are getting more and more further out of step with the way that reality is. And I don't think that the current laws really have a way to address this. And I think that unless they figure out a way to innovate around this and to embrace this, it's going to be, we stand a chance of seeing the next decade and physibles, or these 3D printed things, being demonized in the same way that the last decade has been about file sharing, which I don't think that's the right course ahead for anybody.
Evan, were you surprised that the Pirate Bay did this, or are they kind of behind the times at this point?
No, I mean they're certainly being harbingers of where we're going on this. I mean it's interesting that these technologies have become so advanced. These digital technologies have become so advanced that they're like, it's like post-digital. It's become analog again. And so as far as the law keeping up, it seems like this, because it has kind of gone back, or because it has gone so radically digital, it has become post-digital, thereby analog. It's pretty easy to see a copyright infringement claim on the underlying composition of any music that is embodied in these things that are created using 3D printing. It's much trickier, much more subtle question. So this is where the real inquiry needs to be as to what kind of infringement there may be, either in the copyright or the design patent or something else of a thing, a real a tangible item that is actually created with a 3D printer that would infringe on someone else's intellectual property, like a machine or a car part or some kind of, really intricate thing that is subject to patent protection, for example. So that becomes much less clear as to what the role of, when the infringement actually takes place, I guess, which is where there's plenty of discussion to be had.
Yeah, it breathes new life into keep circulating the tapes. And it sort of gets around something we've discussed a lot on the show, how when you're purchasing legally digital music, that in almost all instances that is licensed to you. You don't physically own it, and there are issues about how and whether the first sale doctrine could apply for you to ever be able to resell that item. So, if you're 3D printing out little tiny 45 records, you're engaged in infringement, but in an entirely different way.
Yeah, I've been saying that the first sale doctrine is, in its last throes anyway because of the movement to digital technology. Maybe I need to rethink that if it's all going to circle back, where there may be something left to it, and it'll become more relevant 50 years from now, even though we thought it was like the rule against perpetuities or something like that, something arcane that's been dead for a long time.
Right. Karl, is there you're a gadget guy on the show. What do you think about 3D printing and its ramifications?
Well, I'm just happy that someone other than me thought, was that a 45 or not that was printed? I feel a little bit better about that now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not quite sure why the Pirate Bay is, sort of the mouthpiece for this technology, or at least for how it's going to be circulated. But I think that there were quite a few 3D printer concept prototypes at CES this year when I was there. And I have to admit, as much as I'm not usually taken back by things that I see technology-wise, this sort of did take me back. And just the idea, it was a little bit too much Star Trek for me, with things, being able to be replicated that way, that I can see this as becoming an issue. I was thinking, of course, I didn't think about the legal ramifications until this show was coming up when I was reading it. But okay, so what happens now? I download something, and now it's not just something that's residing on my hard drive, on my screen, or playing through my iPod, but it's something tangible that's being produced. And who does own that? And can I sell that tangible object? Can I sell that file that can then produce another tangible object? It's definitely above my pay grade on this one.
Oh, interesting. So you did see a lot of 3D printer stuff at CES?
There were probably 3 or 4 that I saw. Some were kind of goofy, and some were not. Actually, there was one that was available that's been there for a few years that I never really thought of as being a 3D printer. It's actually an electronic sewing machine, where the files are transmitted, and it goes ahead and does all of the stitching for you, and you can actually download patterns and different cloth and things, and then you just have to put the yarn in, and off it goes. Yeah, there we go. That's one of the printers there, and I think I saw MakerBot there, if I can remember. There was some bot. It was bought something. But the sewing machine has been out for years, and no one ever really thought about that as being a copyright issue. But you can go and download different patterns, and I don't know. It would be interesting to touch base with that company and see if they've had any issues with that as far as reselling things that people are downloading, or how many times are you allowed to print that pattern once you download it from their online store? I don't know.
Yeah, there are lots of legal issues, even leaving the 3D printing aspect of it aside, about patterns and recipes and that kind of thing. That thing that they just showed, if you're watching the audio, you missed it, but the 3D printer that they were showing from MakerBot at CES looks like it was making a cupcake. So almost a replicator, although I doubt it was food stuff. All right. Well, let's see. As long as we're on these futuristic type topics, Karl, before we move on, I should ask you, you were keeping your eye out, I think, for other legal issues at CES raised by the products you saw there. Does anything else spring to mind besides the 3D printing technologies that you saw?
Well, there was one issue that came up, and I don't know if this is so much of a legal issue, but I thought of you anyway. There's several companies now that have software that you can either purchase or online services that you can purchase to monitor your children's activity online. One specifically that I thought was intriguing does not make – you don't have to actually install something on the computer and then maintain it. Maybe your kid gets smart enough and knows how to delete it, but it works in the cloud. So as long as you can provide your child's Facebook login and that other information, it will send you reports and you're able to monitor for certain keywords and things like that. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, at what point do you it's designed for kids – but what if it's used for other purposes? What if I say to my employees, you know what, I know you're probably using Facebook at work sometimes. But if you're going to do it here at the office, I need you to give me your account information so I can monitor what's being said. And what happens, legally speaking, when your child is 18, if they're still living at home? And how is this technology going to be used? I think with the advent of monitoring multiple social networks in the cloud, there's a lot more of that's going to be happening.
Yeah, Parker, I think this is a whole new, interest node for EFF, is the extent to which you can monitor your children and in what ways and what happens to them when they reach the age of majority. Any thoughts on this? Yeah,
well, I don't want to bring you down, but a lot of this software for monitoring and for blocking certain content, sort of the child proofing or setting this up for libraries is very similar, or in some case identical to the software that's being used in other countries to censor the internet there. And so it absolutely is an area of interest, and there are efforts sometimes to really install this at a rootkit level where the user can't bypass that sort of thing. And that's a troubling precedent, because when we have citizens doing this to themselves, then you can imagine the same thing happening with governments abroad. And so it's the same sort of technology. And so we absolutely are monitoring it very closely.
Good to know. My son is glad you're doing so. I don't know that I'm necessarily as glad. But,
a point that I've brought up before on this, and this really frightens me a little bit. I first heard about this cloud-based social media monitoring kind of software at a presentation that was hosted by law enforcement. The local detective in our community, invited parents in to hear about how awful the internet is and how all their kids are victims of all these terrible crimes and are subject to bullying and all this stuff to scare the bejesus out of you. And then he was followed up by, here's this company. I forget what the name of the company was. And by the way, they can help you monitor what your kids are doing online so that you can, protect yourself from all these terrible consequences that we've spent the last hour and a half telling you all about. The thing that scares me half to death is that I went and investigated this company, and I think I mentioned this before on the show. I know that I have. Yeah. I went and looked at this company. It has like zero privacy policy. So what you have here is all of your kids' content going to the cloud. Outside of the protections of Facebook's privacy policy, for what that's worth.
Is there such a thing? Yeah.
Which ain't all that much, but this is even worse because this company who has a copy of all your kids' data and all your friends or your kids' friends' interactions and stuff without all this content just right there. And, remember, this was in a presentation with law enforcement. I had the feeling that all that, Detective Smith would have to do is like, hey, Joe, send me the profile of kid, Evan Brown's son, over there. No warrant, no subpoena, no nothing. It scares me half to death the way that the Fourth Amendment is just completely circumvented in those types of situations.
Yeah, we're hand-wringing over Google and Facebook and what they're doing with data. And meanwhile, people who aren't really thinking about it may be handing over much more sensitive information about their children in a way that, as you suggest, Evan, may have no safeguards attached to it whatsoever.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was not a question I thought to ask when I was visiting with those companies. Was so what do you do with the data? Obviously, you're going to give it to me, as your subscriber, so I can monitor my kids' activity. But you're absolutely right. What do you do with it? And how secure is the information you are keeping? It's totally different.
Read some of the privacy policies from those companies you saw at CES, and you'll be really disappointed that you asked the question.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that gathers data about us, and you may as well fold into this whole universe of what Google may know, is your autonomously driving car, which of course they're working on. And again, something that comes up in a very ominous way in the book Demon that I'm reading right now, where, fleets of automates are used as armies basically to go and attack anyone that the demon in the story, this sort of malevolent bit of code, it wants to take out. He sends fleets of cars. It sends fleets of cars to do its bidding. The cover story in Wired this month, Karl points out, is all about this. Do you want to bring us up to speed, Karl, and tell us what's the latest?
Speed?
Yes, bring us up to speed.
Bump. All right, very nice.
And what's the latest with Cars That Think?
Well, I was surprised by it. It was the cover of Wired magazine, so of course I'm gonna grab it and I'm gonna read it. And what surprised me was that these cars actually are out there right now. And they're being tested heavily, obviously, but they are in practice. They are functioning. Basically, you've got sensors on all sides, cameras, infrareds, all sorts of monitoring equipment. And the car, even though you have to actually still have the ability to override what the car is doing, it can drive, it can change lanes, it can use stop signs, signals, and it recognizes the difference between a pedestrian, a mailbox, a parked car, and the article, explains all of that. And of course, the big issue that comes to mind now is, okay, so I have one of these cars and it's driving me down the street, and let's just say it runs over a dog, or it makes a mistake and it bumps into somebody. Now, who ultimately is liable? Is it me as the registered owner of the car? Is it the driver of the car? Is it the software designer who coded it apparently not appropriately enough to be able to distinguish the difference? Is it the manufacturer of the vehicle or the interface between the computer and the car? I mean, there are so many moving parts, another bad pun, that, where is this going? But what impressed me the most is, and I will go on the record and say it, I think in the next 10 years, we actually will be at a place where cars are going to be more autonomously driving. And it pointed out how we've taken these steps, everything from anti-lock brakes that we don't really have any control over. We can stomp on the brake and it takes over to prevent the tires from locking. They talked about the self-parallel parking car, which I believe Mercedes had, or BMW, I forget. And one of the reasons that it actually didn't make it to prime time was, strictly speaking, legal. And the insurance industry said, well, who's going to be responsible when you get out of your car, click the parallel park button if it fails? And it wasn't able to come to market because of that.
Well, I'm not sure how Ford's Park Assist works, but I'm about to be the happy recipient of a new Ford Explorer, and we ordered it with Park Assist. So I'll keep you posted whether that actually will parallel park for you. I'm not sure. I haven't used it yet. But yeah, it's a fascinating train of thought, and I love taking that and juxtaposing it to what we were talking about with Google and aggregating information across all of its platforms. Oh, here's Leo self-parking with at his visit to the Ford plant. If you're watching the video, he's got his hands off the wheel. It's spinning on its own, and it is parallel parking. So
crunch.
Yes, yeah, he did. He bumped into something, I believe, which of course wasn't the technology's fault at all. But you start to think about driving in your Google self-driven car and having it, tied in with all your devices, as cars more and more can do, and know so much about you. I can see amazing convenience to be gleaned from all that, and also some kind of scary things. What do you think, Parker?
Yeah, I think that as we move forward with these new technologies, that the privacy element absolutely has to be something that we're paying attention to, and certainly there are conveniences that come with whoever is manufacturing these self-driving automobiles, with them getting this data, and it can probably help them do better traffic monitoring or diagnostics. But it's also important that we preserve our privacy there. And I think one component that we've seen in this vein already that's started to bring up problems is things like traffic light monitoring, where it will take a picture if you go through a red light and just send you a ticket. And there have been all sorts of problems that have come up with that. And so I would be cautious before expanding the ways that information about your driving or your location or your destinations is being centrally monitored.
I don't know if I'm going to be asked to sign any further documentation when I take charge of my new Ford that has so much automation built into it, but I doubt it. I doubt I'm going to be asked to indemnify them for anything that might go wrong with the car. I could see, various governmental regulatory agencies being in a huge uproar if any car manufacturer ever asked purchasers to do that. Evan, what do you think about the liability issues that Karl was alluding to?
Well, I mean, that would be huge. That's something that there should be as much of an outcry over as anything, because that's really sticking it to the consumer in a real and tangible way. Because I've dealt with enough insurance defense lawyers to know that there's all kinds of on both sides of auto liability cases, both parties throw everything at trying to either prove liability or dispense with, or to shield from liability. So if it's going to go to the consumer, I would hope that Al Franken will write a letter or something. So that's I don't like it at all. Yeah, I mean, it seems like clearly the insurance companies would be the ones to have a real interest in that as well, saying, are we going to insure against this responsibility that the owners are taking on when we buy the car or not? That's another sector that would really have something to say about this.
Yeah, Karl, you definitely have a foot and a half in the insurance camp as well as your side job or day job.
My real job, right? Well,
yes.
That's right. That's what pays the bills, right? I mean, I am an insurance agent by trade, and what's interesting is we have come across some of these things, and typically what happened, the few that I've seen, there's been 3 or 4 actually, is with the backup cams, and people say they're basically using the backup cams instead of looking over their shoulder, and well, it doesn't work perfectly. I mean, there are little blind spots on that, and between the time you look at the backup cam and you start moving, people move and things get behind you. And we've actually seen a few insurance cases where people are trying to say, well, it's not my fault. I looked through the backup cam, and and the other side says, well, you're supposed to look over your shoulder. It's just supposed to assist you. It's backup assist. It doesn't relieve you of the liability of things you hit just because you're looking through the camera. And
yeah, that's fascinating. They are interestingly named in that sense. What do you think? I mean, it's sort of in the insurance industry's interest to figure all this out and figure it out quickly, right? Because if it winds up being more economically efficient for them to have cars be automated, then they're going to embrace it. They're going to encourage people with premium brakes and things to adopt these kinds of technologies. And if it's not, they'll do everything, I think, that in their economic power to block it. Do you get a sense for where that's going?
Yeah, I do actually. They're very quick. The insurance head honchos, whenever I do get the chance to actually break bread or spend some time or even sit in on a conference call to hear about what's coming in the next year or so, they're always quick to point out that they're at the forefront of consumer protection. Think about the third brake light, that was something that was pushed heavily by the insurance industry for, additional safety, and analog brakes being mandatory and things of that nature. So they're big on talk that they want to be at the forefront of pushing things that make cars and driving cars safer. Having said that, I don't think they're going to be looking to say, well, yes, we're all for the parallel parking assistant, but it's still going to be our responsibility if someone uses it and it fails. I think at this point, they're still the bottom line is going to be the buck stops with the person driving the car, whether they're turning a steering wheel or making the choice to push a button and let the car do something.
Yeah, it is fascinating stuff that we'll continue to follow. One thing we've been following for a long time, and Parker has written a great piece on, is ACTA, which of course is winding its way toward adoption by the various countries, the EU being next up, the next big player to decide what they're going to do with it. And Parker says we have every right to be furious about ACTA. And Parker, I think this would be a good time to remind folks of why that is.
Sure. So ACTA is, of course, the content of ACTA is alarming. And we've got some indications that it's not as bad as it once was, but it's still really egregious content, and content that's unlikely to be passed in any individual country. But then the other thing that's so infuriating about ACTA was the process by which it's come up for these agreements, and it was negotiated in secret by unelected officials. And in the U.S., we've decided that the USTR decided that it's an executive agreement, so it doesn't even need to be voted on by the Senate as a treaty might. So it's really it's bad law that is unlikely to have any sort of support locally, and it was just done in a way that really ignores the public interest. And so I think that regardless of where you stand on IP enforcement or the way that infringement should be addressed online, this sort of process for passing a law is totally unacceptable.
Yeah, it does seem like a very backwards way to have such a broadly applicable set of rules and regulations put into effect. So thanks for your piece.
Well, how does that happen then?
Go
ahead.
What do you mean? How does it? How
do such sweeping, guidelines, laws, if I can call them that, get put into place without any type of oversight or review?
Yeah, it's pretty. I think it's shocking when you find out the details about this, and in fact, the first time many people found out the details about this was in 2008 when WikiLeaks revealed some of what was happening, and certainly there's a place for private negotiations, and I understand that if it's in this case they claim that it was a national security issue that this had to be private. I don't think there's any evidence that this is a national security issue, and I don't think that this is really about counterfeits at all. I think that it's been misrepresented in order to have this secret negotiation, and as people find out about it, they're angry, and I think that they've got every right to be angry.
All right. There's one more story I want to hit on real briefly before we get to our tip and resource of the week, because a lot of people sent it in and thought it was an intriguing decision. It was from a court, I believe some sort of regional court in England, and had to do with photography and copyright infringement. And the particular determination that set off red flags for folks is that infringement was found in this case without there having actually been a copy. It's a similar photograph. It's a photograph of a classic iconic double-decker bus cruising through London in front of Big Ben. The bus is colorized and the background is black and white. But there are two, those are the similarities between the photograph. I don't know, Alex, if we can pull them up and show people. There's a picture in the story. There you go. So there's one that has the bus kind of in the background and one where things are closer. It's clearly an inspired by kind of scenario, but it's not a direct copy. And yet the judge in the case found that despite the fact there was no copying, there was infringement. So it's an interesting story for photographers. And, you know, it did occur in England, which has its own different copyright framework than we do in the U.S. I'm not certain that this would have flown here in the U.S. Evan, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't want to pick nits, but I believe the court found, just like a court would in the United States, that there was copying. That term having a special significance in, you know, the world of copyright law, you know, and actionable copying. And, you know, believe it or not, I see some similarities to the idea that's going on here with the whole notion. Remember how I was saying that the world has become so digital that it's like post-digital and thereby it's analog. I mean, this type of fact pattern was in just about every kind of copyright case before digital copying became so prevalent. We've become accustomed in the last 10 years when we think of copyright, we think of things like piracy and, you know, the perfect copy, you know, 1,000 perfect copies of one thing and, you know, MP3 files and videos. And so that it's become second nature for us to think now that for there to be an illegal copying, it's got to be an actual duplication of that thing. But, you know, there are all kinds of cases from, you know, for as long as copyright has been around, where the issue is, you know, somebody has done something that, you know, they were copying because they were looking at something else and they were, you know, rendering it in their own way. This reminds me a lot of a case that I have it right here. It was called Kish versus Ammirati in Puris. It's from the Southern District of New York in 1987, and the issue in that one was whether or not, you know, two photographers who had arranged the subject matter in their respective photographs in similar ways, whether that was actually copyright infringement. And the court denied summary judgment. So what that means was, as a matter of law, it was not infringement as a matter of law. What that means is it was up to the jury to decide whether or not that was infringement, and the case probably settled or something like that. But what we have here, what we get from that, and from the legal standpoint, what the legal rule that comes from that is that there can be infringement when you look at the creativity that's involved in things like the selection of the subject matter, the lighting, the camera angle, and stuff like that. So from that perspective, recognizing where copyright has been long before the digital age, the holding in this case comes as no surprise at all to me.
Okay. Parker, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that to the extent that one of the bedrock principles of copyright has always been this dichotomy between idea and expression, and this came up recently in the Golan v. Holder decision, which talked about, you know, they said that the permanence of the public domain is not one of the bedrock principles. What you have is there exists a thing called fair use, and that there's a difference between idea and expression. And I think in this case, sure, the idea behind these two photographs is pretty similar. You know, it's not a very original idea in the first place, but I think that the expression is different. And once if you want to throw away that principle too, then really there aren't many safety valves left in copyright, and it becomes just a way of silencing all sorts of speech.
Yep, I can see that perspective on this most definitely. I think Doug Kay is one of the people who sent this my way, and I think he has been doing some hosting over at This Week in Photography, and Carolyn Wright, our friend and off-time TWiL panelist, was on with him to discuss this. I've been looking around for that episode. I haven't found it, but I think it's out there. You might find it if you're interested in hearing more about it and hearing from Carolyn, who is a an attorney who represents photographers and thinks about all things photography. So more on that over there. And we've got a tip that is right in line with that. Also came to me via Doug Kay and This Week in Photography. He linked to the ACLU's page for photographers. Know Your Rights for Photographers via the ACLU, which deals with all kinds of things that come up, where you can lawfully take pictures, how you can take pictures in public spaces and on private property, what people can do to restrict your ability to take pictures on private property, and various other things that you encounter routinely as you go through your life as a photographer or as a photojournalist. So our tip is to go and read this page if you are out in the world taking pictures, because it's kind of a it gives you wonderful guidelines and an understanding of what you can and cannot do if you encounter police, for example. What you may and may not do as far as photographing them, and what happens when you add audio and video to the mix. We've talked a lot on the show about various states' wiretapping laws being invoked to prevent that kind of activity. The ACLU, of course, comes down on the side of anything that you're doing to photograph or tape anyone in public is constitutionally protected, but they also acknowledge that it's somewhat controversial, and decisions have come down on both sides of the issue. So they give you some good guidelines and pointers. And thanks, Doug, for letting me know about that. And our resource of the week comes to us from Jonathan Peters, who joined us on This Week in Law, episode 143. He has a great article that I believe he referenced on the show for journalists, and what they should know about storing data in the cloud. It's called Updating the Privacy Protection Act for the Digital Era. And it talks about how the Privacy Protection Act, which applies to journalists to help them not have to reveal their confidential sources, has some weaknesses when it comes to storing things in the cloud. Long story short, if you put things in the cloud, there are interpretations of this act that could apply that say, hey, you're no longer protected. So he gives some very good reasons why the act should be amended and brought up to speed with the way that things are stored and accessed in today's day and age. And it's a good cautionary tale for anyone who is a journalist or a proto-journalist, or as Dan Gilmore might say, does acts of journalism from time to time. Because if you are concerned about keeping your sources confidential, and you are someone who, has drunk the Kool-Aid and is in the Google universe and stores all your data in the cloud or on Amazon or anywhere else, these are going to be concerns for you. So thanks so much, Jonathan, for giving us that great resource. And with that, I'm going to go around and ask everyone on our wonderful panel this week if they have anything else that we haven't talked about today that they're dying to talk about, or any final thoughts they want to leave our viewers and listeners with. Parker, how about you? Oop, are you muted?
Uh-oh.
There you go. There we go.
Yeah, sorry, I had muted. One important thing to keep track of, especially if you're following ACTA closely, is that there's another agreement sort of along the same vein called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, or TPP, which is also being negotiated in secret and appears to have a lot of the harmful language, some of which was taken out of ACTA. So in many ways, it's worse than ACTA. It's very important that we keep on top of this and that we follow TPP as closely as possible so that it doesn't get sort of slipped under the radar like ACTA was.
Good to know. Thank you so much. Karl, anything on your mind you want to say as a last thought?
Yeah, it was good to finally see Parker's hair there. He flipped the cap back a little bit at the last bit. No, I think the one thing that's sticking out for me from today's chat is that as much as it's not exciting and we don't tend to always take the time to read some of these privacy notices, I think that as time goes by and we're relying more and more on cloud hosting and on just online services, that we really do have to take the time aside and read some of these privacy notices, just so we really do know what things are private, what things are not, and where our information is going to be stored, kept, and shared.
Thanks. Yes, I totally agree. Evan, anything on your mind that you need to get off of it?
No, nothing that's, like dying to get off of it. But I guess the one observation that I would make from the past week, and it's not a subject that we touched on today, surprisingly, is the Facebook IPO. And, speaking most generally, it's that if you take a look at some of the things that Facebook says, it underscores the importance of a lot of the issues that we talk about every week on the show, privacy, intellectual property, intermediary liability, the international scope of all these things, open source. There's a lot of good stuff that's really in the interstitial parts of the S1 filing that came out a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a blog post at internetcases.com. It's the most recent post. It was on February 1st that kind of highlights some of these big important issues. I mean, they're the most important issues to me from in the S1 filing, but they haven't gotten a lot of press. So I would commend that for folks to read and to think about, and it'll provide us plenty of issues to talk about in the future as Facebook expands its monolithic reach over the face of the earth.
Yes, let's definitely hold that thought. We've gone, a bit long this week, but I definitely want to talk about Facebook and its IPO. And so let's do that next time. And with that, I just can't thank you guys enough. It's been a wonderful discussion. Parker at EFF, wonderful to have you join us this week. And we're so grateful for the good work you do over there.
Thank you, Denise. This was great.
This is Parker on Twitter. I found you on Google+. Anywhere else where people can find you off and after the show?
Yeah, this is Parker on Identica, if that's your sort of thing.
There you go. Yes. I'm so glad to hear that Identica actually still exists. I haven't used it in a while, but it's nice to know that the Twitter alternative is still out there. And, do you post there regularly, Parker?
I do. And actually, the software's come a long way. So if you haven't used it in a while, it might be worth checking out again.
All right. I will do that. Thanks so much. And we hope to have the chance to chat with you again soon. This has been really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Karl, great to have you back on. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm glad we could finally get your thoughts from CES and all your other great insights today.
Thank you. Yeah, there was so much stuff from CES, and I was so diligent about taking some notes to try and go over on the show. It's a real bummer we didn't get a chance to make that happen. Maybe at some point, if there's a lull, we can always pull out that content and maybe get some of it out there.
Yes. Well, how about every time I have you back on the show in the next, several months, you'll have your CES moment until the next CES rolls around.
Perfect.
And deluges us with more stuff.
For sure.
Right,
that sounds like a great idea.
Until that time, you can find Karl over at Karl Wireless on Twitter. Also, My Tech Boss on Twitter. You're on Google+. Anything else?
No, that's pretty much it. I'm actually using on Twitter now. It's at My Tech Boss. The Karl Wireless has sort of gone to the personal end, but for the fun and for the gadgets and all that good stuff, everything is at My Tech Boss, and the webpage and the YouTube channel is also at My Tech Boss. That seems to be the channel I'm trying to work on. All right.
We'll find you there then. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And Evan, you've been busy on your blog. Your blog has some great stuff on it right now. I'm hoping people will go check it out. InternetCases.com, of course, and at InternetCases on Twitter. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. There's a lot happening in this space. It's a great time to be interested in the law and technology and where those things mix up together. So thank you very much for the kind words. And thanks for reading it.
All right. And I look forward to chatting with you again next week. And hopefully to seeing our listeners and viewers next week. We record live at TWiT.tv on Fridays at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 1900 UTC. So you can come join us then, or you can find us on iTunes, on YouTube, wherever you like to consume your post-recording digital content. We're likely to be there, so we're thrilled to have you any way you like to take down the show. We love having you contact us between the shows. TWiL has a Google Plus page. a Facebook page, and you can, of course, email me. I'm Denise at twit.tv. Love hearing your ideas and thoughts about what we've discussed or what we should be discussing. So definitely keep us posted about that. And until the next time, this has been a fun episode of This Week in Law. We appreciate the whole panel and all of you who've tuned in. Take care.